Things may be looking up for California Governor Gavin Newsom. Polls and mail-in ballot returns are trending toward a positive outcome for the Democrat in the recall election due next week. And Vice President Kamala Harris showed her support yesterday in the state. Mindy Romero is a research assistant professor at the University of Southern California and founder and director of the Center for Inclusive Democracy. Mindy joins us now. So, Professor, thank you so much for being with us. Give us a sense of where the polls are right now. I thought it was neck and neck, but now it looks like maybe Gavin Newsom's pulling ahead a little bit, at least in the polls.
Yeah, well, it was neck and neck for quite a while, to everyone's surprise. But in the last few polls, the last couple of weeks, we've seen a widening out, much more comfortable margin for Newsom. In many polls, a 12 percentage point margin, for instance. And the early ballots that are coming in, which are even greater test, I think, are showing overwhelmingly Democratic, as they should be in a deep blue state. But they're giving some, I think, some relief to Newsom and the anti-recall effort.
As far as you can tell, what's causing the shift? Is it simply people coming back from the summer and paying attention for the first time? Or are there issues that are really driving it?
I think you're right to some degree. Certainly, as the polls were being conducted earlier in the summer, there were far fewer people that were paying attention to the recall that even knew that the recall was happening, let alone what the stakes were all about. And that's what I think the last couple of weeks or last month for Newsom has been a really big push at trying to raise the stakes, literally talking about talking about the recall as being a matter of life and death, right? The choice between Newsom and potentially a Republican replacement candidate. So I think the stakes have been raised. More people are paying attention. People have got also their vote by mail ballot in the mail in California for this election. All registered voters were given a vote by mail ballot. And they're starting to get some of that messaging. It's becoming a reality around the race and having to make a decision. And I think certainly the emergence of Larry Elder on the Republican side has given Newsom a great kind of foe to position himself against. That is also, I think, helping.
There's some high-profile national political names that are weighing in now. We have President Biden cutting some commercials. We have Kamala Harris from California going to California. We have former President Obama. Does it make a difference for these big national figures to appear?
Well, and that's part of Newsom's strategy, right? Is to bring in the big anchors to talk about why it matters, to get people's attention, to tell people, hey, this isn't a slam dunk. Because a lot of polls were showing us that his supporters felt like, if they were paying attention, they didn't really feel like it mattered for them to vote because they thought, it was a done deal. He was going to run away with it. What were the consequences around it? And so I think bringing in certainly like Barack Obama, but to our state, Harris and Biden are getting people's attention and making them feel like there is some consequence to this. And certainly it brings just more news coverage, which reminds people there's an election and tells them what the date is and so forth, which is also important because, this is the only thing on our ballot out here. It's an off-cycle election. Just making sure people understand that there is actually an election happening and what they're supposed to do with that ballot, that it's not just a sample ballot, I think is also just part of this whole approach that Newsom has to really aggressively take.
Mindy, what do we know about the Latino vote? All of us paid attention to a New York Times piece that basically said the Latino vote is really not prepared to come out in a strong fashion for Gavin Newsom, that maybe he's overlooked them or hasn't given them enough attention and love. What do you know about the Latino vote?
Yeah, well, it's certainly complicated because I'll say this at the outset. Of course, Latinos are not a monolithic group, right? Even in California. But that being said, Latinos are in California overwhelmingly skewed Democratic in terms of their registration. That's important for us to understand. Overwhelmingly, Latinos feel like, if you look at some of the polls, that the state is going in the right direction. Some of the data have shown us that maybe that not as many Latinos, certainly than as whites, for instance, have supported Newsom and opposed the recall. And some of those numbers, I think, were surprising for many analysts. But, overall, the vote itself, any statewide race, any time, if you don't take the Latino vote seriously in California, it's going to be at your own peril. And I think Newsom, there's been some challenges for Newsom in terms of how well he's outreach to the Latino vote. It's harder in this type of election to get the word out to voters, period, because there is only one thing on the ballot and they're not expecting an election at this point in time. And it can be historically, this type of election, a special election, can be just harder to reach Latinos, period. And Newsom has been trying in the last week, particularly or so, to develop additional outreach methods to the Latino vote. It's still an open question about how successful he's been. So I'll say, bottom line, Latinos will be a big part of this electorate, of those voting. Already, they're about 17% of the ballots that have been cast thus far in the early vote. It will be a challenge for them to be as representative as represented as they were in the November 2020 general election. Latinos will be underrepresented compared to their numbers in the population, but they still will be a formidable force. And Newsom would do well as on the recall side, on the Republican replacement side, to pay more attention to the Latino vote, particularly because Latinos are a little more likely than other groups to wait to vote in person. And so there's still an opportunity to transition those voters, right, those potential voters into voters. It's not a done deal yet. We've got a lot of days of voting, and we have all the way up until election day for the Latino vote.
Pretty soon, we're going to be turning our attention to the midterm elections in 2022. And I wonder, from your point of view, do you think that there might be some lessons for the Democrats that might come out of California, either positive or negative? I mean, when you talk about Latinos, for example, I remember in 2020, there were some surprises in Florida because it was perceived Democrats had sort of taken it for granted. Should the Democrats nationally be looking at things in California to indicate something about 2022?
Yes, and they are. And that's why you see people like Warren and Harris and Biden and former President Barack Obama paying attention and campaigning for this governor. The recall has consequences. It's not just about September 14th. It's not about who wins or who doesn't win when it comes to the recall election. There are already consequences for the Democratic Party and the Republican Party here in our state in California and nationally. So if Newsom doesn't run away with this, right, there's a big question. It looks like he's going to win, but how, by what margin? And if it is at all close, that will be not meeting expectations. And I think in many camps, it's going to be looked at as a failure, and certainly spun as a failure by Republicans here in our state and nationally. That has implications that fuels kind of the narrative nationally in terms of, the push against Democrats and their policies, and saying Democrats, have bad management and don't serve the needs of voters. So much so that a deep blue state like California has almost kicked out its Democratic governor. That narrative can fuel other recall efforts, can fuel fundraising, recruitment across the country for Republicans, but also very much going into the 2022 midterms. And of course, don't forget, here in California, we've got a number of competitive seats in any given midterm election that affect the balance of power.